Yeah. Okay. Hey everybody, I'm Nico.
And that makes me Kevo.
And this is mcu.html/too many Lokis all trying to bang each other.
Yeah, no me gusta. No me gusta at all. But there are plenty of things that me gusta about Loki so far, for sure.
Ja very gusta.
But as we were watching the series, we weren't sure how much we had to respond to episode 2 to do an episode for that of our show by itself. And then when we saw 3, we definitely knew we didn't have enough for a full episode. And then 4 it really felt like these 3 episodes formed an interesting trilogy and arc of themselves, which makes a lot of sense. It's the way that not every single episode of WandaVision was a tentpole. There are ones that are more tentpole-ish, and I think 1, 5, and 6 will probably be that. Let's discuss the middle then.
You know, starting in 1985 was sort of an interesting thing for Loki 2 to do. Loki number 1 kind of has this Mad Men kind of good place feel. So I guess it makes sense that in some ways, Loki number 2 would give us sort of a Game of Thronesy, Ren Fairsy feel. But at the same time, we're talking about like 1985, so I was immediately like, the other side of Stranger Things.
Yeah, I kind of wish we'd seen a little bit more 80s to it.
Pew, 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 pew.
I appreciated the joke of you think that you're in the medieval times, and it turns out it's 1985 in Oshkosh, which I believe is where the creator of Mobius is from.
Oh, that's
and
cute.
That's one of those, like,
Walt Simonson.
They love putting in those little Easter eggs that really don't even mean anything, but they do mean something to someone. Plus, it's just fun to say Oshkosh.
And bagosh, this scene was both fun and kind of annoying. I loved seeing Mobius's love for Loki tested in the field.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that was great. That was what I wanted. But at the same time, you know, he's lying and I have the mustache to prove it. And, oh, but I am. Oh, but I am.
Wolf ears. Wolf teeth. I don't get that line. It's one of the promotional posters and some of the merchandise has that line on it. And I'm like, I still don't effing understand what it even means.
Well, Loki is a wolf.
And Fenris, it's really just about Fenris, let's be real. I loved the semi-callback to a recurring MCU joke in the use of holding out for a hero. Another Footloose reference, which is fantastic.
And a reference to our own work, as it was the theme song for the first, 22
That's
episodes of
right.
X's4 Podcast.
Yes, it was.
Before I was composing the pieces that started our shows, we used the Frou Frou cover of Holding Out for a Hero from the Shrek 2 soundtrack. Yeah.
It's a great cover.
It's a great piece of music. So.
And speaking of music, there is another recurring name from our show who was featured in this episode. The music that was featured during the Renaissance Fair is actually from The Sims Medieval, and it was composed by John Debney,
who is an MCU composer guy.
MCU, he's
putting
done
the C in composer.
Like he's all over the place. So it's really funny that it was The Sims music for 1985.
And you know, it was sort of that weird blurring of the scenes of importance that I understood where you felt like not a lot or not enough happened exactly in this episode. This felt perhaps a little bit like the issue that's filler that you know is meant to lead you to the next part of the story. And it just sort of felt like that kind of over and over again. I loved these scenes because one of the things we complain about with these shows in particular is that we're promised an era. We're promised the great glory days of the Avengers being bestest buddies. And then we get there and that's the first 10 minutes of the movie only. And the rest of the film is about the sadness and the drama. But
Age of Ultron.
Yeah. So here though, we're getting tons of little Loki missions. You're never going to be able to say that there weren't a bunch of little missions and there weren't a bunch of little scenes at the TVA. Both of those things were here, and it's not that it made it unsatisfying, but perhaps we were spoiled by the 9 episodes of WandaVision.
For sure.
And perhaps the political intrigue style of Sammy Jimmy Birdarm gave it a little bit more wiggle room to be a little bit paced slower. So when Loki, a show about a trickster god and time travel, slows down extensively, it perhaps feels like we're lost in the story with it. It doesn't feel as much brave as it could.
I really get what you mean. I think that the biggest issue for this episode really is the pacing. It's very uneven. There was really cool stuff in it, like Loki working in the field with Mobius gave off huge Law and Order and X-Files vibes, but then you had these really long stretches where he was researching in the library. It's dead silent. You need to be paying super attention to be able to read whatever the data he is looking at in those files. The salad sequence was funny. It was funny for like 40 seconds, but it felt like it was 5 minutes long. And I think that's really more my issue than anything else. It's an issue that I continued to have for the rest of the 3 episodes that we're discussing because I don't feel like we are getting a lot of information about what's going on. They mentioned Nexus events in the first episode and have mentioned them a little bit throughout. We know that has to mean something because of WandaVision and their mention of Nexus in the antidepressant drug commercial, but we still don't really, even after having an episode called The Nexus Event, have a full comprehension of what that means.
I think one thing I didn't care for was using Pompeii. I feel like Pompeii is like one of the most overused historical things. And I get it. It was a big deal. But I get it. It was a big deal. Okay.
I really wish I didn't agree with you, but it's one of those things like the DB Cooper sequence from the first episode where I feel like we had an indication that this was going to happen, and then when it happened, I'm like, oh, I don't mean to talk down on the production value, but it really came across very cheap to me more than anything else. It was this one little alleyway that was very tight and obviously CG background, and it just didn't feel as lovingly attended to as a lot of the other sequences are, and as I would expect from something like that. And frankly, you have a whole plethora of apocalyptic scenarios that you can choose from in human history itself. It's bizarre as it is that an alien would choose a human event, but sure, you chose an event in human history. There had to be so many others you could have used. Krakatoa, if you want to go for a volcano. But why is it always Pompeii?
Well, and I feel like they're just playing through a cracked list of what's interesting points in time, and it does start to sort of weaken the efficacy of a show that's all about anywhere, anywho, anywhen. Well, it's the same people, it's the same times, it's sort of the same straightforward ideas. Not that I minded it being, obviously, a Loki, and it was a Loki we all sort of predicted. There was a lot of speculation that it would either be Lady Loki or Kid Loki, and then here we are with it being a sort of Lady Loki, and she's kind of evil, kind of not. She goes by Sylvie. She's sort of a different character, but here she's Loki. And I found myself maybe a little bit like, okay, this is the part that I saw coming. This is the part that I accept is inevitable. Now get me to the next big thing. Okay, she possesses people. That's interesting. It's kind of an enchantress bit. And that's, of course, the character that people are saying Sylvie might actually be. If she's not a Loki, she might be an enchantress. But, who's to say she can't be both? Loki is the adopted child of an actual frost giant, so why can't this just be the enchantress Amara was adopted by Odin instead?
And one of the things that I'm seeing in a lot of the marketing, and that we've even heard on the show by now, is what makes a Loki a Loki. And I think the idea of her ending up not being a Loki in terms of like actual timeline, but rather in terms of spirit, would be an interesting play on the concept. I'm really glad that they revealed who the variant was at the end of this episode, much like the previous episode. I was glad they revealed it was a Loki. If you dragged out who it was for a long time, I was going to be annoyed. I think there were fun, subtle hints in this episode before the reveal that we were going to get a female Loki from the way that some of the possessees played her. One of the coolest things I thought was how B-15 played Sylvie, because B-15 is normally a much more gruff, assertive woman, and she took on a much more like feminine, playful quality that fits the character of Sylvie, and that was such amazing attention to detail for that character. Speaking of attention to detail, Rock's car in general, obviously some connection to Roxanne. I wonder why they're not using Roxanne explicitly, or if maybe that's on purpose and they're going to go somewhere with that if the timeline is affected. It's just interesting when you see those little things in the background.
Now, something that was very much in the foreground was Sylvie's attack on the TVA and sort of the wake of bodies it left in the path to getting there. All of these TVA agents that have been possessed now have awareness that they are in fact variants themselves. That puts this whole thing a lot closer to Exiles from the X-Men than it does exactly to Walt Simonson's TVA. But fine. I feel like her plan is just so evil. she's going to blow everything up. Now, I understand that the TVA are bad guys, but it's one of those things of terrorism in a situation that you don't understand the full ramifications of what you're doing is not automatically justified because you're angry. So it does make her out to be a much badder guy at the end of 2 than they want us to remember she is throughout 3, which is, a Lokiism. Tried and true. I did not think that we needed to be told she was sympathetic for her to be sympathetic. You could have gotten me to believe she was sympathetic without, here!
I think I'm not as quick to label her actions as evil because we are still uncertain on the motivations of the TVA.
I agree completely. I think that it's from the outset, it looks evil, and you don't need to soften me on that.
Yeah, okay. But then I also think that they didn't do the best job presenting what Sylvie's motivations were in the first place. That they're like, look, she's evil, but now immediately maybe she's not evil.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
we don't know the TVA well enough yet for us to be sympathetic to this event even happening, especially because I didn't really feel like there was a ton of fallout from those explosions.
Agreed.
I feel like going from that moment and Sylvie trying to infiltrate the Timekeepers to having the entire episode be about Lamentis 1, not showing the TVA ever again, not even really mentioning Mobius the entire episode.
Yeah.
I feel like it was kind of a big mistake to do it that way. We don't know the premise of the series well enough to shake the foundation of it like that. It's like the Pegasus Order of the MCU that I was reading about recently that moves Captain Marvel to directly after the Avengers as opposed to being film number 21 of 23, because then we see more S.H.I.E.L.D. action going on before the fall of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Winter Soldier. That did happen kind of early in the film franchise for us to even really care about S.H.I.E.L.D. Anything that happens to the TVA, we don't know them well enough to be like, oh no. And then to have them all just walking around still doing their jobs, it's not nearly as chaotic as I would have imagined based on the explosive ending of episode 2.
Well, and I think that was partially because they wanted this episode to be a little bit more of a character piece, and they wanted that intimacy. I mean this in the most fun way, but when you're talking about gods, I guess, yeah, a bottle episode is an entire planet.
Okay.
And
an apocalypse.
Yeah, and I thought that there was a lot of great character development here, but I don't know that I feel like the show is moving forward. I feel like the Loki aren't moving forward, but I don't know that the show is. And I think this was sort of the point where I realized, WandaVision was an event comic in the style of Tom King's Vision, or the style of perhaps going back a little bit further, Mark Waid's Avengers Forever, which was the definitive Kang story for quite a while. And then, we got into Sammy, Birdie, Bucky, Jimmy, Zappy Zap, Russia Arm, and that was in a lot of ways a movie TV adaptation of Who Will Wield the Shield, this sort of event where no one was sure if it would be Sam, if it would be Cap, if it would be Bucky, who would be Captain America. Then we get this one, and this feels like an intimate 6-issue miniseries that the only things that are really going to matter, truly in a big way, are the ideas from 1 and the results of 6. And I don't know that 2, 3, 4, 5 have no value, but I think 2, 3, 4, 5 have a character value over a Marvel Universe propelling value, whereas it seems like most minutes of the first 2 shows were about Marvel Cinematic Universe at large. Loki seems a little bit more focused on its endgame.
And you said that to me while we were watching episode 3, specifically during the train sequence, where I was like, I need more on Sylvie to care about this character. I'm enjoying her, but I really need to know what's going on, how much we're supposed to care about her, how much we're going to be getting of her, or if she's just going to disappear after these 6 episodes. And that was when you turned to me and you were like, we're not going to get answers about her until episode 5. And so far, you're definitely right. We've gotten little bits and pieces, but we don't know anything to the point where she absolutely could still be, as we've said, the Enchantress, or she could just be a fucking human who was, changed somehow and being used and manipulated by maybe a different Lady Loki or some other Loki. There's still so many directions that her character and her idea could go because we don't know a ton about her.
And I think that's one of the things they're leveraging here. That for all the ways we love Loki, the only thing we know about Loki is everything Loki is a lie. So they're leveraging how much we care about characters that we don't know about here in an effort to sort of draw out the time. I don't think this is poorly made, sloppily made. I'm not disappointed, but I feel as though they are working to bide the period of 6 episodes in a way that allows them to have a definitive story within that doesn't doesn't necessarily affect the without. And I think moving Loki the way they did even tells us that they kind of knew that Loki was pretty self-contained. Loki can't do too much for the future or the present unless it's the far future or the not so near present, due to the fact that they had no problem bouncing it around the schedule like they did. And, you know, in a lot of ways, bouncing Loki around the schedule is sort of a metaphor for the climax of this episode, where you finally think you're going to get to the arc and it's like, but it's destroyed. And you're just sort of like, you thought something was going to happen, but maybe not what you thought is going to happen.
And I love that you said that, because something else that I think this episode really drew my attention to is the ways that Loki talks about inevitability and the idea that the inevitable isn't actually always inevitable. And Loki being a trickster who loves chaos, this show is about how chaos can come in and fuck up your shit in ways that you don't even realize. Like, I guess, falling in love with yourself.
I gotta go.
Yeah, you can go. We can stop the episode here. I don't mean to be so hard on it. And for me personally, the thing that really is bugging me about it, that's bugging me about the MCU in general right now, is the fact that it feels like Marvel Studios is willing to do literally any story that they possibly can to make people romantic with each other, including a character with themselves, as long as they're an opposite gendered version, before they will do anything queer.
And I do want to point out that while they are saying that both Loki are bisexual, putting two bisexuals in a heteronormative relationship with opposite gender people is not the same thing as queer visibility in a romantic sense. That is still visible queers, but I wouldn't call it queer visibility, because there is nothing inherent about their queerness that is visible. So because we're told they are queer without it being something we can see, we need to accept that that is visible queers. We're looking for queer visibility, which is a queer action taking place on the screen. You know, Loki being queer, he did not do anything queer on screen. We got Billy, but we got the version of Billy, a queer man who shouldn't be doing anything queer on screen, right? Little baby. And I feel like there weren't a lot of queer people to show off in Sammy Jimmy Birdarm, least of all not Arm himself.
No.
So I guess that was him squeezing oranges. I find myself frustrated with perhaps some of the character narrative development, since we're getting character narrative over story.
And I don't want to take away from the fact that it was a good thing. It was a good thing
Definitely.
to give us that queer visibility, but a character being asked if they have a princess or a prince and responding a little of both, I imagine, like yourself, is not good queer visibility. That's the kind of thing that I would have seen on Buffy when I was in high school, literally 20 years ago. If that's the best that you can do as a 10-plus-year-old cinematic franchise that has netted billions and billions of dollars, you should actually be kind of embarrassed, is the word I'm using going forward for this sort of thing. When I look at the queer visibility on the Rugrats revival, or on High School Musical, the series, these children's programming that are above and beyond what the MCU is doing, I can't think of a better word for it than embarrassing.
So if the first two episodes didn't do a whole lot to further the narrative of the series, the fourth episode tried to make up for it pretty extensively. We got that amazing Sif cameo, which could not have been cooler, could not have been more fun. It was great to see Jamie Alexander reprising a role that she so embodied so beautifully.
And specifically referencing Norse mythology in the haircutting thing. Like, it was a very cute nod. Can't wait to see more of her again. And this was a great little tease for more in the future.
But you probably won't see more Mobius because he got zapped.
Or is he? Because if Loki's pruning sent him to wherever...
But Lokis are Lokis.
I just don't know. And that's part of why it didn't really have a lot of emotional impact for me when Mobius got pruned. It didn't have none, because I really enjoy the character. But A, we don't really know him that well because he was only in episodes 1 and 2, not in 3. And we don't know that this actually killed him. You know, the same way that it was revealed that the Timekeepers are androids. There are probably someone out there. It's not just androids, but now it's another step that we have to wait.
But wasn't that whole fight sequence basically Star Wars Episode 8?
Oh, yeah.
That was just straight up the throne room battle in Star Wars Episode 8 in front of Snoke. Like, the whole thing. And then the Timekeepers are just like, robots. And, like, did everybody else know the Timekeepers were robots? I loved it.
I think My favorite part of the sequence was Hunter B-15 showing up. I wasn't in love with her character in the first episode, but she is another reason that I really feel like 2, 3, 4 represent an interesting triptych, with B-15 taking Sylvie back to Rock's car and getting her memories back in the rain. And she's really been giving such amazing performances throughout just these 4 episodes that I hope we see more of B-15. I don't know that we would, because that's a really random character name, but maybe she'll reveal that her name is actually Robin.
Or maybe her name is Loki. Who knows? But I mean, even then, I feel like I don't know that every minor character that has become important in the Marvel Universe was always meant to be important.
I know.
So, like, she still could become important with a name like B-15. It just doesn't mean that her origin was necessarily the most expected origin. And I do think that's important. One of the biggest problems people had was when they were told, you will love Captain Marvel. Fans in droves were just like, no, I won't.
Don't tell me what to do.
But if you let people fall in love with B-15 and she becomes popular, then she becomes popular. And that's fantastic. I'd had some concerns about making Ravonna so evil and about killing off Mobius. But if you're doing that so that another woman of color in the form of B-15 can shine
and have an arc like she had in just 4 episodes,
I'm here for it. I am here for that dynamic shift in the storytelling. I think the killing Loki was kind of a cool surprise. It made me think maybe it'll be Sylvie and flashes of him for the rest of the show.
I would have been okay with that, really.
Especially if it was a handoff, trading it off to her. I mean, I have no problem with Sylvie, but I don't think she's interesting on her own yet. So far, she is a reiteration of Loki, but angry at Loki and kind of like about it. I enjoy it, but for me, the entire series was summarized in that post-credit scene. The fact that Kid Loki was right there smiling at me, my kid Loki, my precious, precious kid Loki,
with
was
reptile Loki.
Little reptile. And, we had boastful Loki and we had
so
classic. Oh my God, boastful Loki was way too hot.
Oh my God, poor Richard. Why did he agree to that? I mean,
but it's really cute because that means in the Captain America Museum, we saw a classic Cap costume.
Yeah.
We saw the 70s costumes in WandaVision, and now we have classic Loki. So every show has had a tribute to the 1960s and 70s costumes that suck so good.
And Richard E. Grant, he's one of those actors like Michael Caine where he's just going to do what he wants. He doesn't care. And good for him. I love Spice World.
It's like when Michael Caine beat Tom Cruise for Best Supporting Actor when Tom Cruise was up for Magnolia. And he said, don't worry, Tom, you could not afford the pay cut of winning Best Supporting Actor. So don't worry about it, right? There's just some actors who are so beautiful for not being the lead. I'm sure they don't love hearing that, but the fact that they're working is pretty cool.
And they're still iconic.
Yeah.
It's the same as if we never see Mobius again, whether he comes back this series and we just never see him again after Loki season 1. Using iconic actors like that, that's part of why they do it, because they want you to connect more easily with the characters.
With our whole that it's a comic book arc or miniseries kind of idea in full view, that it's the 6-issue classic, right? There's a couple of runs that are sort of like classic lengths. You do 4 issues if you're like, it's like an up-and-comer and it's like a big deal that they're getting it. But like, you do 6 issues when it's a motherfucker. And, you do a maxi series when your dick just doesn't fit on the page. And that's what you do. And this Loki series really smacks of that, like, yeah, motherfucker kind of mini-series run where they're trying to reinvent the character and redefine the character in a bold new way that's really the same way, but in a new direction. And I think 5 is where all the answers are, and 6 is going to be where it all pays off.
I get that, and something that we also need to consider is how much won't be paid off.
Truly.
Knowing that Loki still has so much more to do, that this is going to very clearly be tied into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, that there are probably going to be major ramifications following that film. Even with the finale, we don't know how much is going to be wrapped up in the immediate.
And on that note, the first episode was like 56 minutes, the second episode was 52, the third was 42, the fourth is 48. I'm sort of concerned this should have been 5 episodes and maybe
longer,
perhaps them each having a little bit more of a consistent length. I do love this idea that you make the episode the length of the story, but 3 felt shorter than 1 and 2. 4 felt a lot longer than 3 did, but it had a lot more action, which kind of balanced it out. So I might want a little more consistency in my episode lengths.
Something that Feige had said in terms of format and length for the seasons and episodes is that it's not going to be a hard, fast rule on anything. And I think right now they are experimenting with that stuff and trying to come up with a format. But I think for a season 2, more episodes at shorter length would probably be better for me, because then you could have a whole filler episode and it wouldn't feel like you only have so much time. Why are you wasting one of your weeks?
Either that or give me 4 1 hours.
Yeah, 4 very densely packed 1 hours. That's something that they're going to be able to experiment more with now that they have some shows out and they're getting feedback from people. So Moon Knight, She-Hulk, we're probably going to start seeing more experimental format with those series.
Well, until next time, I've been Nico, your resident Asgardian.
What does that make me? Kevo, your very cool variant?
Okay, I was going to say what a good ass you have, but that's also pretty cool.
Thanks.
I love you too. Until next time. Hey guys, if you like that cut, do be sure to like some of our other materials. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out these other amazing videos here at X's for Podcast.